Welcome to As I Live and Grieve, a podcast that tells the truth about how hard this is. We're glad you joined us today. We know how hard it is to lose someone you love and how well-intentioned friends and family try so hard to comfort us. We created this podcast to provide you with comfort, knowledge, and support. We are grief advocates, not professionals, not licensed therapists. We are you.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back again to another episode of As I Live and Grieve. I tell you probably every single time, so I'm sorry if I'm saying the same thing over and over and over again, but I mean it from the bottom of my heart. I so appreciate y'all listening. We have a joke about y'all because I lived in the South for 10 years, so I can claim y'all, even though I'm a Yankee now. But I'm just so grateful for it. And I know you're scattered around the world. And the other thing I do kind of teasingly is saying to everybody, if you know anybody traveling to the North or South Pole, tell them to get on Wi-Fi and download an episode of my podcast. Because I look at all the different countries that are represented. And I don't have either of those continents yet. I have every other continent except those two. So just help me out that way if you would. Show a little support. Show a little love. With me today is yet another great guest. You know, our paths keep crossing and I just love it because I learn as much from our guests as I think they get out of the podcast. And maybe as your listeners do too. It's helped me heal immensely. Today, here is Kelly Wilk. Hi, Kelly. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me back. I was overjoyed when I saw you at Camp Widow last November.
I know. Wasn't that
Oh my
fun?
God.
Wasn't that fun? It was such a great reconnection. And I love when that happens. And it really reinforces for me the whole concept of networking. You know, because sometimes you just don't know when you're going to run across somebody a second time. And when you do it, it's such a treat.
Maybe we shouldn't have been surprised. I mean, the way that the life was going, I mean, you know, the way that life was going at that point for me, I was like, God, someone just give me a tea.
I know, but I knew you lived in that city.
Yeah. And the grief people, the widows and widowers are people. So really,
Absolutely.
You know, our cause and anybody who knows grief, I've told them about Camp Widow and they've known about it as well. And I am hoping to present next Widow, Camp Widow.
Oh, that would be super. That would be super if you did. That would be super.
More time.
I know. To get us started, would you first remind our listeners, who is Kelly Wilk?
Gosh, what an interesting question. Sometimes I don't know. It changes day to day.
That's fair.
I mean, I became a widow when I was 34, which sucked. I lost my dad when I was 19, and that wasn't so great. Mm-hmm. But I'm also a memoir writer, and I have used memoir writing my whole life to process those kind of things. I need creativity. I kind of live and breathe in it, and it comes out of my pores. So it's just natural when I run into a crisis, like being diagnosed with fibro when I was 12. I write my way. I psychologically am able to write my way through it, to process it. And that has just naturally led me into memoir and into poetry and personal essays. And when my wife died, her adage was, you always have the choice to laugh. So, of course, I did a blog called The High-Flying Adventures of Captain Grief because I was pissed. And I needed
I love the title.
Needed someone to yell at, and I needed somebody to be the bad guy. And she was the best thing that came into my life out of grief and out of losing my wife, because she stepped in and just, you know, took pot shots at me for a year until I stood up and realized that I was her. And she had all the things that I was needing to say, how do I survive this?
Right.
That's succinct.
And look at you now. Okay, so the focus today are some of the differences in grief for various people. And this podcast has established numerous times that grief is different for everyone. And each incident of grief for that same person is also different. Of the 4 major losses I have, every one was different.
Yep.
Everyone was different. The hardest, the most difficult was the most recent, the loss of my husband, Tom. And next month will be 7 years. Long time. I still grieve him.
Yeah.
I still think about him. just about every day, just about every day. The big difference is that now when I think about them, I don't start crying. Now when I think about them, I usually will smile. Usually. There are exceptions to every rule.
Yes.
So, one of my questions for you, and you've been kind enough to offer to come on and be very candid, and I know that you can only speak how it has affected you, impacted you, but you lost your wife, so you were in a same-sex marriage. How or if do you feel, I'm trying to get the right words for the question here, do you feel that who you are as a person, your gender identification, sexual orientation, whichever spin you want to put on it, do you feel that that made a difference for grief in that particular instance?
I think it made a difference in how life rearranged itself around that grief, because I was a queer widow as opposed to just your run-of-the-mill widow, I guess.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
mean, you said you have a joke about y'all. Well, I have relatives in West Virginia. And I mean, for instance, my aunt and my uncle, who'll probably never listen to this, they went to my sister's wedding. They would not come to mine.
Would not
No.
come to yours.
And my mother was so angry because this is your niece, your son, or your brother is dead. And I'm not even sure what their religious affiliation is, but it hurt my mom. It hurt my mom because she lost her husband when she was 50.
Yeah.
And it's just, there's insensitivities, all sorts of insensitivities around people when they're grieving. And, I've been guilty of it too, because it's not comfortable. Grieving and guilt is not comfortable. And you deal with it however you can in the moment, but not coming to someone's wedding because they are marrying a woman is a decision. That's not an off-the-cuff remark.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
And they didn't come to her funeral either.
Yeah.
I mean, that day was such a haze.
Well, I know they are. Yeah, mostly the memories I have of Tom's celebration of life, if you will, are just the ones that were really, really notable, that either made me cry or made me just have my mouth open, gaping in awe, or something funny.
Yeah. No, and it's...
So there may be some distinctions there, but to expand it more on the topic of grief, defining grief very simply as a response to a loss.
Yeah.
I would have to guess, if you will, or say my perception would be that if someone is in the LGBTQ plus community, I hope I say that right, because that's a lot of letters.
In the queer community.
Well, all right, in the queer community, if someone is in there, they suffer grief
already
all their life around so many different issues.
Particularly if you're trans.
Before they even get to that major event of a death of someone you love, they have gone through so much grief. So what type of issues might someone in the queer community face that would cause them grief?
Well, I think just because, for instance, the risk of suicide is higher amongst queer kids to begin with. If you've already got someone who is dealing with depression, who is dealing with this or that or the other thing, and they lose, it doesn't even have to be their spouse. If somebody they love, if a partner or a friend is gay bashed and they die, it's only if somebody who respects your orientation and your gender expression will they express you. So there's just more chances for people to say you don't matter, or why would I be interested? And I'm lucky. I am, other with the exception of the one part of my family that was not there for me. I've been very lucky with my family, but my challenge is that I went to an all-girls school for 13 years, and for 13 years looked in the mirror and saw a straight woman. So I kind of had to exfoliate a lot of things.
Was it a case of you didn't know what you didn't know?
I think I knew, but
you think you knew?
I knew, but it was interesting because I didn't really know until after my dad died. And suddenly it became much more important to come out and to deal with that rather than to deal with the death of my father, right? So
Right.
I just kind of put a cap on that and worried about trying to come out, and it did not work, and it just blew up in my face.
Okay.
And I did tell my mom, and to be fair, she was grieving and she couldn't handle anything, and she gave me the whole,
Sure.
it's a phase.
Yeah.
What?
Well, I can only imagine because I've not gone through that experience. Well, I can't say that completely because my younger daughter, Kelly, is in a same-sex relationship. But with her, it was never she never came out to me because I just knew. I just knew, and it was fine with me. But if we can set the issue of death aside for a moment and just think, now, when someone in the queer community comes out, it would be my sense that they would be grieving at that point because they have made a conscious decision. And I'm looking for you to say, yeah,
Yes.
Kathy, that's spot on, or Kathy, you're full
Nope.
of crap. They had a life they thought they were going to live. And maybe it's one kind of centered around things that they had been told by their parents or things they had experienced. Like maybe for a young girl, they would be bought dresses all the time when you went to the store, when what they really wanted to wear was pants and a tailored shirt or something.
Well, that's why I could hide more, because I had my femininity.
Right.
I was a very feminine. I've always been this biggest unicorn, swirly glitter girl. So it kind of made me invisible to myself. And it was only when I started to register the homophobic comments around me that I realized I had a reaction to it, and I felt uncomfortable.
Right.
And this happened in high school.
And do those comments kind of, sort of, equate with those inane comments we get after losing someone? Like they're in a better place?
Not really.
Is it the same type or
it's
not?
not.
No.
I was terrified.
Okay.
Because I felt like I was standing in a kitchen, and it was a friend's parent that made this comment.
Okay.
So all of a sudden I was like, deer in a headlight. I'm not safe. Right now I'm fearing for my life. And I wasn't literally fearing for my life, but all of a sudden it was when you go to, I'm fine, to get out.
All right. So you felt threatened.
Absolutely. And
so the difference then might be fear.
Absolute fear.
Or hate.
Because whenever, hate. Because whenever you come out, it's a risk. I mean, if you tell someone like me, if you have a disability, if you're ADHD, if you have fibro, if you're grieving, grief is an invisible disability. I can tell you that. So you risk telling someone that, because they will perhaps change their opinion of you. However, if you come out and someone has an absolute problem with your orientation, you will know, and that bridge will be burned. And you don't know when that's going to happen. So I have not been attacked, but I've had friends that have been my girlfriends, butch friends, that have been punched in the face on the streetcar on the day of Kara's funeral. It's just that it's that extra layer of shit that you have to deal with on top. And they didn't tell me that this happened because they didn't want to upset me. But she was attacked.
Sure.
And it's like, you don't, if you are visibly queer, that makes you more of a target. I am less of a target. I can pass. But with
visibly queer. Okay. I like that phrase,
Kara was
because
visibly queer.
That really signifies, and I can relate to that. I can think of people I know that I would say are visibly queer, and others that just, you wouldn't know unless you knew. But it just seems to me that the word hate keeps coming back to me, that the things that are said in those instances are from the basis of hate, as well as from the basis of ignorance. Both, and those two together are they're lethal.
If someone feels threatened, if they feel backed into a corner, as even if they're not being provoked, if just the fact of me or the fact of my partner, like there's a part in this book where I talk about Kara called it the look. She called it the what is that look. And one day we were going outside of Toronto to get camping gear at a camping store warehouse, and we were late. So we walked down a line of people that were all lined up to get their camping gear, and we got the what is that look about 100 times in a row because we were outside the city. I was absolutely livid. And Kara, who had been living in the body that she was living in, for 32 years at that point, just went,
right.
I'm like, no, you should be mad at this. She's like, what am I going to do? This is me. And before I was not me, I was punching walls. It is better if I am me. But the other thing is with me holding her hand, not only is she visibly queer, I'm visibly queer.
You are also. Sure.
You know, so that, and when you come out, just to come back to when you're grieving or when you're accepting a physical disability or something like that, it's about you changing your idyllic image of yourself. And I was counseled in this. Like, we got grief material, I think I told you when I went into the Fibromyalgia Day program about grief, because you grieve the ideal image of yourself. You are not who you used to be. So you do that when it's grief as well, and when I grieved Kara, it's like, who am I? Oh God, I am now a single mom. I am now a widow, and I am surrounded by a whole bunch of women who have all risen up to help me. But the dynamic is different because all the people in my group who are single are now potential partners because I'm same sex and I've just lost my wife. That was confusing.
Right, yeah. Confusing for you or confusing for them?
Everybody was pretty much up the shit because they had lost Kara, honestly.
Yeah.
But my walls were down. I was hurting. And I had people that really helped. And I had people that made it complicated, which was another layer that I had to deal with. And then I was young, and I suddenly had all of these parents telling me, you should do this, you should do that. So all of a sudden,
were they basing it on the fact that you were queer or not? Was it just general advice that you would have gotten regardless?
It was general advice, but not only with the parents, but also now with my social circle. I was not very good at putting down boundaries. And suddenly I had to learn that I needed to put down boundaries to keep myself safe. And I never expected that I would have to do that with my friends. Like, that was totally out of the blue.
Can you clarify that a little bit more? Why would your friends, your social support,
because they could also have been issue? They're women. They were also women, single women.
Were they coming on to you?
No, but I think everybody has.
They just felt uncomfortable because that
this dynamic,
possibility existed.
Exactly.
Okay.
The dynamic of who I was changed because I did not have a partner anymore. So I was now suddenly a single lesbian widow with a whole bunch of people around me, and I'm thinking, I'm 34. I have a huge life ahead of me. How do I don't know how to belong to somebody else, yet I want to only be with the people that I'm already comfortable with because that's all I can handle right now. But those relationships can get complicated because they're trying to comfort me. They're trying to spend time with me. They're trying, and I was just a big, endless hole of I need right now. And you have to stand up and not do that and put boundaries on relationships.
Yeah, I would say that's something that is really unique then about grieving if you are in the queer community. That certainly is easier to say than LGBT.
Totally.
And I mean no disrespect at all, of course. But that sounds like it is something that's totally unique, that all of a sudden to give someone a hug might feel awkward, for example.
What do you want from me? What do I want from you? Why is this different?
Yeah.
Oh, it's different because my wife died. it just
Yeah.
nobody.
And whether or not that was the intention,
Mhm.
there still could be some of
Oh,
those
exactly.
feelings. So yeah, I understand now. That would be very, very difficult.
Exactly.
Very difficult.
And
Now, do you think that happens for males that are part of the queer
I don't
community?
know.
Or do you think that's
I
unique
don't
to
know. I think
females?
generally women, I would suspect that it would happen more for women because women
More
in a
for
group
women.
are different
Okay.
than men in a group. Women are
Right.
already all over each other. Like, we
Yeah.
just are physical with each other without a thought.
Right.
Well,
Right.
that physicality suddenly meant very
Yeah.
different
Okay.
things
All
because
right.
Kara left a hole in everybody's
Yeah.
world and everybody was
Yeah.
spinning out. And just the fact that nobody knew how she died, and
Right.
everybody was just in shock, and we just
Right.
did the best that we could. But honestly, it was awful,
Yeah.
and
Was there a point that things started to get better in that regard? That you could be with
yeah,
your social group and everything and felt more relaxed, didn't feel that kind of unease?
it actually felt a little bit better once. It took me about, I guess it was 6 months, and I started to date
Okay.
again. And
Okay.
I felt like everybody did oh, she's taken care of. Like there's
Yeah.
no more ambiguity. She's dating
Okay.
someone.
Now the intentions are clear. Right.
Exactly. There's not that
Yeah.
awkward question that people are saying, and just
Uh-huh.
and it's not like starting to date again after you've lost your partner at a young age. It's not hard enough to
Right.
tell someone. Like, I told Kara's best
Right.
gay male friend. He was the first one I told that I was dating, and he says, "Of course you are." I'm like, "Thank you for not having a problem with this." It's like, "Of course you did." He lost his partner as well. He figured, he knew. And this is why being with your people is so much easier, because sometimes there has to be so much explanation
Right.
as to why you're feeling the way you're feeling and how the situation is
Right.
different for you, just
Yeah.
because it is.
And do you feel at this point in your grief journey, and we all know that we'll probably grieve for the rest of our lives for that very special someone, do you feel that there are any issues related to your grieving now because you're in the queer community?
There were, yeah, because I mean, when you said, when did things kind of, clear up and those kind of things? Well,
Yeah.
it was when, a friend of mine who was my first year university roommate was single too, and was getting out of a long-term relationship, and was kind of in the same place I was, because I look at death as the same way as losing a partner to divorce, except it's more complicated.
Absolutely.
It's
Yeah.
awful.
Well, you still grieve it. It's still a loss.
Exactly. But you
Yeah.
still have to contend with them not choosing you, not
Definitely.
being with you, but also having,
Definitely.
especially if you have kids. So my house was falling down. My house was literally falling down, and this friend said, "Come and buy a house with me. I want to have a baby by myself. We will co-parent." So we did. We bought a house together. My son and I lived on the top floor of the triplex. She lived in the middle and had a baby. It was like what she decided was going to happen happened. She's amazing.
Yeah.
She's just
Determined.
and she's very specific. She's like the manifesting
Yeah.
master.
Yeah.
And we've lived together now for like 7 years. But it was interesting because, and I didn't notice this myself, but I realized, and I had to explain to her, look, I'm emo. I am having feelings. And I think it's because you don't realize that me living with another woman is completely different than you living with a woman. Because to you, I have always been and still am your roommate. But to me, this is a queer marriage without sex. This is what it is. And I am going to have to take a step back sometime, because I'm still grieving. I will always be grieving. Yet I am doing the exact same things with my roommate, raising my children with my roommate.
Right.
Again, complication just kind of follows me, especially when the pandemic hit and we were both working from home.
Oh,
I had
yeah.
the kids and she was working online.
Yeah.
And we had to become a family. We had,
Sure.
that was even more difficult for me. It made her push
Mm-hmm.
back, and it made me go, okay, I'm not going to touch you. I'm just going to draw a line. Very uncomfortable.
Yeah. Yeah.
In the process of the pandemic and me doing a lot of introspection, I dealt with a lot of fear that I had around men.
Mm-hmm.
And I got time to look at that, and I realized it wasn't that I was opposed to dating men. It was that I actually needed to clear a lot of stuff, and being in isolation from everyone. I've been
Mm-hmm.
dating men for the past couple of years. Like, I've
Mm-hmm.
realized that I am fluid. And again, my
Mm-hmm.
identity changed. And again, I was worried about
Sure.
telling people, oh, guess what? Me, the lesbian writer, needs a new label. Well, why do I need a new label? Kelly hasn't changed. That's the thing about labels.
I don't like labels, number
No,
one. That's just not
but other
fair.
people like labels because they like to determine who
Right.
you are.
Yeah, but that doesn't allow you to
No,
change.
but when you are first thinking about it, the
Yeah.
fear is there again.
Yeah.
The fear is because
Yeah.
you're doing it in
Yeah.
reverse, right?
Yeah.
How
Yeah.
will my
Yeah.
friends react? How will my family? How will
Yeah.
Kara's family react? Well, in the
Yeah.
end, you have to come down to who the fuck cares? But you have to
Yeah.
get there. It's a
Right.
hurdle that you have to go over, and it sucks that
Right.
we have to go to this degree of explanation when we're just trying to be.
Right. Right.
It just adds that layer
Absolutely.
of complexity
Yeah.
and complication, especially when other people are
Yeah.
like, I don't get it. I'm like, you think I do?
Yeah. 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 Well, it just is. It just
Mm-hmm.
is. So I want you to open your book. I think you had something in your
I do
book you
indeed.
wanted to
I
share.
do. Well, it's special to me because you did, and I didn't get to see the presentation, but you talked about butterflies and
Mm-hmm.
transformation, and I have something that I wrote that was really important to me about that. It's a
Okay.
journal entry. Okay.
Okay.
It has passed. You have now been gone more than a year, but only just. I know my grief has changed. The feeling of debilitation is less, or less often, or less intense, or some combination thereof. I know there is more hope. There is more joy than there was. When I look at myself clearly, I see the me that belongs to myself as well as the me that belonged to you. When I look at myself, I see the life that is mine and the life that I had with you, but at a distance, which is getting wider every day that you are not here. Sometimes I think it's a miracle that I can recognize myself outside of a relationship. Not anymore. Because for many years, I developed a sense of identity and dependence on my partner. For this reason, the isolation has been very healing, in that painful, growing kind of way. The only noise and turmoil I have to confront is my own. Turning inwards has turned the noise into music. The singular melody has encased me, clearing my space of emotional debris so that I can witness the change and transformation in my life still sliding around under the surface of my cocoon. In
Mm-hmm.
here, my attention has been drawn to a number of things, external things I had no idea about or didn't fully appreciate that were a reflection of the internal changes happening in me and have yet to happen. When I was young, my father bought me a butterfly net so we could go down to the creek among the reeds and catch a monarch. We had discussed the marvelous migration patterns of this butterfly, and I was eager to be a part of their story, if only as a momentary witness to their long journey south to Mexico. My thoughts are caught up in these splendidly orange-winged beauties, the once threatened species that was starting to recover but is now back on the endangered species list. Theirs is a lengthy process of transformation. The emergent miracle of their lives has been a through line in my thoughts. How do they do it? How do they change from an unassuming life camouflaged in the leaves to an enchanting creature that can take to the skies? All of the answers lay in the mystery of the cocoon. When a baby begins to form, it is one cell the size of a poppy seed. But when the yellow and white striped caterpillar forms a shell around herself, she is already something. Where does she go? Now I know. She dissolves. She
Mm-hmm.
unforms. She breaks down in the most complete sense of the word. She is no more. and the magic of time and life recreates her as a miracle. And when she steps out into the world once again, she is new. This is the combination of biology, instinct, and faith that creates and completes this mystery. Once she shuts herself in, her body slowly breaks down, bit by bit, body part by body part, cell by cell, and perhaps memory by memory, to the state of primordial ooze. It is the only way she can rebuild herself, to commit to this isolation and surrender everything to the universe. I've been asked to commit a similar act of faith, to spend a year doing nothing but let everything change. To release everything I knew, everything I was sure about, everything I was afraid of, and everything I was afraid would never happen, in order to transform this life into a beautiful new reincarnation of itself. And once I finally understood the importance, the urgency of this process, I looked in the mirror and said, "Okay, I understand. I'm ready to break down."
That's great. I love that. I would have read that at the beginning of my workshop, actually.
So worth the wait?
Yes, it was. It was. It's fascinating, and you do have a way with words.
Thank you.
You're quite eloquent. I was glancing at the clock while you were reading, and sadly, our time is coming to an end. But before I actually wrap up, I want to turn the microphone over to you, Kelly, and let you speak directly to the listeners. Tell them again about your book, where they can get it. Tell them anything you'd like to about if you have any events coming up, workshops, whatever, how they can get in contact with you, whatever you'd like to share. And keep in mind that your contact information and the name of the book will also be in the podcast notes, so people don't have to run for a pencil.
Okay, good.
So the floor is yours.
Okay, so you do not need a pencil. You do not need a pen. My website, which is going through some changes right now, it's in a cocoon. It is www.captaingrief.com. And yes, Captain Grief is still alive and kicking. And we have current content there. And that is where I will put all of my events that are coming up. And if you are in Ontario, in the GTA, I'm going to be having a book launch where it'll be the same kind of format in terms of reading books and selling books. But if you don't live nearby, you can just Google up amazon.ca and look up The High-Flying Adventures of Captain Grief. And the memoir is there in hardcover and paperback and Kindle. And I also have a Facebook group called The High-Flying Adventures of Captain Grief. And that is actually the original space that I opened my blog on. And there I put stupid stuff, I put memes, I put resources, I chat with people about loss. So if you're looking for a kind of community, I highly encourage you, please find us on Facebook and join us and join the conversation, because everybody needs a space to grieve the way that they need to grieve. And thinking about book launches, I perhaps will do an online book launch, because what I want to do is to try and be accessible to people as possible. Right. You know what? Particularly if they're queer widow and widowers, because it's a hard thing to find a space to grieve. But when you're queer, you want to know that you're safe. So absolutely. Mine is an absolutely safe LGBTQ, trans positive, Black positive, Latino positive, neurodivergent positive, everything community, because everybody is going through the shit,
Everybody.
And needs support.
Yep. Grief sucks, and grief is ugly.
There's
no way around it. It just is. It just is. Yet somehow we can continue forward on our grief journey, redefine ourselves, be somebody completely different than the person we were before. And in my calendar, there's really only before and after.
Yeah.
That's it. Before Tom, after Tom, before mom, after mom. That's how my calendar goes. But, we have to get through it. And again, like I say many times, we like to mention self-care. And one of the best ways of taking care of yourself is to surround yourself with like-minded people. because they will get you.
Mm-hmm.
And especially if you're having a bad day, these people will get you.
Yeah.
And they will give you the space you
Mm-hmm.
need. They will give you the support you need because they understand.
And that's why this is so important to me, my friend. Like I know that I can say, Kathy, I'm having a really shit day. And I won't have to give you the precursor of anything. You get it. You're in my shoes. So
yeah,
you need
it just is. Yeah, even though, I haven't walked your exact path, but we still have that understanding that you go through stuff, you need support. So sometimes the best gift you can give someone is just to listen, because maybe all they need to do is verbalize it so it's no longer spinning around in the brain. Just, get it out in the air and release it.
It's a processing. It's the same for writing. I have to write it to process it, but I have to speak it, even if it's just to myself, before I write it, just to hear it, to know that it's real, to construct it again before I put it and I commit it to, to paper. But that's the other thing that I would like to start doing. I'd like to do them in person, but I'm also considering doing my narrative healing workshop for your journey of grief. Because the first time I did it, my participant had actually lost his whole family in a house fire. So we did, I know. So we did 6 weeks of him writing and creating a comic book to encapsulate that 6-week journey of using creativity to process his loss. And I'm hoping to do this at Camp Widow.
Nice.
Yeah. And then I'm hoping to open like physical classes, but just like I'm hoping to reach a wider community online with my book, at some point I would love to have a wider community for online narrative healing for your journey of loss. So, it will be on my website. So just, check in. I'm hoping to grow that because this is what I have done to be okay. And if other people have...
I like that. This is what I've done to be okay. Yep. That's kind of how it works. It really does. So I really have to wrap it up at this point and tell everyone, take care of yourselves. Thanks again for dialing us up, downloading us, and listening. And catch us again next week as we all continue to live and grieve. Thanks again,
You're
Kelly.
welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening with us today. Do you have a topic that you'd like us to cover, or do you have a question from one of our episodes? Please email us at info@asiliveandgrieve.com and let us know. We hope you will find a moment to leave a review, send an email, and share with others. Join us next time as we continue to live and grieve together.